live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Gurley. I am a 3L and the president of the University of Michigan Law School's chapter of the Federalist Society. Today, I'm bringing you an exciting installment of the Federalist Society's 15 practice group study break series PG-15. The 15 practice groups of the Federalist Society are organized by substantive areas of law. Each practice group is led by a chairman and executive committee comprised of top lawyers from around the country. They meet each month to organize in-person events, webinars, publications, and panels for the Federalist Society's flagship event, the National Lawyers Convention. You can learn more about these practice groups at fedsoc.org/practice groups. Today, we hear from a distinguished member of the Telecommunications and Electronic Media practice group, Danielle Thuman. Danielle currently serves as legal advisor to Commissioner Carr at the FCC. Prior to joining Commissioner Carr's office, Danielle was a communications attorney in the Washington, D.C. office of Wilkinson Barker, LLP, where she focused on a wide variety of regulatory, policy, and transactional issues, with a special focus on infrastructure, public safety, and spectrum policy. After attending the University of Virginia for her undergraduate degree, Danielle earned her JD cum laude from Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, where she was associate editor of the Catholic University Law Review. She also earned a certificate from the Columbus School of Law's Law and Technology Institute. Without further ado, Danielle, take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited to be here. There's no better time to be talking about closing the digital divide. Hopefully everybody who's listening will take this conversation home to the Thanksgiving dinner table later this week. But as Jeff mentioned, my name is Danielle Thuman. I'm legal advisor to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. He is one of the 2 Republican commissioners at the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC. The FCC is an independent agency that regulates communications by radio, TV, wire, satellite, and cable across the United States, and it was formed by the Communications Act of 1934. I do need to add the disclaimer that I'm here tonight in my personal capacity, and so my thoughts and views do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Communications Commission or my boss. But with that, today we are talking about closing the digital divide and providing internet for all. The work that's being done today to close the digital divide, the different programs and funding streams that are available, and some of the different challenges that we are seeing as well. So for those who are unfamiliar, the digital divide is the term that's used to describe the gap between those who do not have equal access to the internet or other digital technology, including smartphones, tablets, and laptops, and those that do. Digital equity, by contrast, is the concept that all individuals need to have this internet and advanced technology in order to fully participate in today's society, democracy, economy. So universal connectivity, or the idea of closing the digital divide, is not new. As we'll get into a little bit more in our Q&A, the FCC has long been focused on the idea of universal service and the goal of making sure that all Americans have access to advanced services or are connected. The last administration at the FCC was the PI administration. Pre-pandemic made great strides in closing the digital divide and bringing more individuals online. They cut a lot of regulatory red tape at the federal level, and I think states followed suit in order to ease deployment and get more people online and bring more competition to the marketplace, in your local communications market. But the public and private sectors have both been laser focused on closing the digital divide following the COVID pandemic. So when COVID restrictions first went into place in March 2020 2/3 of Americans worked from home very quickly, and internet traffic increased more than 20%. People were doing everything from home. I'm sure, Jeff, you're probably doing school from home. People were working from home. I was at home working full-time for WBK, but people were doing their telehealth appointments from home. People were doing their virtual workout classes from home. I think that there were a few holidays in there in 2020 where people were connecting with their families from home. But if you didn't have access to robust, reliable internet connectivity at your home, you were not going to be participating in like a full day-to-day life. You were not going to be able to have the same connectivity to your school or to your work that other people would have. So there was a risk that people who were on the wrong side of the digital divide were going to be left further behind. And so since March 2020, there has really been a steady stream of dollars going out the door at the federal and state level to broadband connectivity in the hopes of closing this digital divide. There was an unprecedented amount of dollars that were made available for broadband infrastructure. A lot of this, there were several different pieces of legislation that Congress adopted that we'll get more into later that made a lot of funds available through some agencies that had never been looking at this issue before, but like we had Treasury Department, Ag Department, Education Department, states, all different counties, local school, school boards making dollars available for broadband to make sure that everybody could get online. So the Biden administration now has an Internet for All initiative that also includes a $42 billion with a B broadband equity access and deployment, or BEAD program as it's known. And this program is in addition to a lot of the existing programs at the FCC and other agencies aimed at broadband deployment and or providing affordable connectivity to Americans. So we'll get more into all of that, but I think by some of the higher estimates today, there are still about 42 million Americans that are on the wrong side of the digital divide. And those are high estimates. So I think some of the lower estimates are closer to like 15 million, but somewhere between 15 million and 42 million Americans do not have access to broadband at their homes. So this work to close the digital divide is very important. The dollars that are going out the door from Congress through these agencies, the federal and state level, it's very important. These are taxpayer US American dollars. So we need to make sure that the funding is being put to best use to close the digital divide for once and for all. So with that, Jeff, I think if you want to go ahead and dive into some questions and do more like Q&A, that would be great.
Absolutely, Danielle, and thank you for all of that. Super interesting questions that you deal with every day. So you mentioned that the FCC plays a role in internet connectivity. Can you talk in a little more depth about the FCC's universal service goals and these programs that go along with it?
Sure. So universal service is the principle that all Americans should have access to advanced communication services. And it was the cornerstone of the 1934 Communications Act that formed the FCC. So this is dating back to the days of telephone, making sure that all Americans had access. And as the technology has evolved, so has the FCC's perspective on universal service, and so have our programs. And the reason behind having these universal service programs is because of how expensive deployment can be. So in some geographic areas where it's particularly challenging to build out, deployment can be not only expensive, but cost prohibitive. There's really no business case for deployment. There's no way for a company to recoup the dollars that are being spent on putting the infrastructure in the ground. So, you're thinking like rocky terrain. You can imagine some parts of the country. It's interesting. I was recently in a meeting with some stakeholders from Alaska, and they were talking about not only is there a very short window for deployment because of the temperatures and the seasons in Alaska, but also in some of the northern parts of Alaska, when it is warmer and you would typically be able to do infrastructure deployment, it's wetlands. So you actually can't get the equipment in there because you'd be operating in bogs. So very expensive, as you can imagine, very challenging. So the FCC has universal service programs to kind of respond to that cost and to those difficulties. So we have 4 primary programs today under the FCC's Universal Service Fund. One is the Connect America Fund. It used to be known as the High Cost Fund, and that program provides support to certain qualifying providers that serve high cost areas in the country. And so the second program is the Lifeline program, which assists low-income individuals by helping to pay for their monthly phone bill charges so that service is more affordable. Then you have the E-rate program, which provides services and equipment to schools and libraries that are eligible, including on tribal lands. And then you also have the Rural Healthcare Program, which allows rural healthcare providers to pay rates for telecom services similar to those of their urban counterparts. So, in the event that you're in a rural part of the state, we then look at what the cost would be in a comparable urban marketplace that's nearby to assess how much a rural provider would be eligible to receive. So, those are the big buckets. There are several other non-USF programs that the FCC also has that are focused on closing the digital divide, including the Affordable Connectivity Program. And so the Affordable Connectivity Program is a new program that was stood up earlier this year by the FCC. It's funded through congressional appropriations, which is very different than the FCC's Universal Service. The other fund in the other 4 programs I was talking about, which are funded by actually a line item charge on Americans' phone bills, but ACP and some of these other programs are from Congress. And ACP provides a discount of up to $30 a month for internet service for eligible households and $75 per month for households on qualifying tribal lands. And so ACP stemmed from the FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which was stood up by Congress in the early days of the pandemic. And that was responsive to, some of the need that we were talking about earlier for people to be able to get online very quickly, particularly in areas where there are services available, but they're just out of reach in terms of affordability for some Americans.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Danielle. It sounds like this connectivity problem has been a really big priority for both administrations, now the Biden administration post-COVID. Beyond just the FCC, are there others addressing this digital divide?
Sure. So the Biden administration has this new Internet for All initiative. It's currently underway. It was announced very early on in President Biden's administration, maybe even when he was campaigning. A flagship of that Internet for All initiative is the BEAD program, which will direct $42 billion to states to underserved areas or locations which lack minimum download and upload speeds of 25.3 megabit per second speeds, and underserved locations where download upload speed is under 120 megabit per second. So it's a really big program. It's underway. Funding decisions have not been made yet. We're looking to 2023 and beyond to see those dollars actually going out the door and into the ground across the country. But there are a lot of other dollars that are earmarked for infrastructure as well that could be or have been used for broadband in the last year. So the Treasury Department expended $350 billion in ARPA funds through the states last year in response to the COVID pandemic. And altogether, by our counts in my office, Commissioner Carr's office at the FCC, There have been about $800 billion appropriated by Congress or budgeted by agencies for infrastructure programs over the past few years that could be used for broadband. So not necessarily, all of those dollars are not necessarily being used for broadband, but they could be used for broadband infrastructure or for efforts to bridge the digital divide, including, some of this is going to schools for students to have the equipment that they need, computers, hotspots, that kind of thing, to go home and do their homework at home. So agencies include the FCC, the Department of Commerce through NTIA, the Agriculture Department, the Department of Education, all of these different agencies and departments of the administration are all either establishing programs or allocating dollars right now for broadband or equipment use. And this is all, this is on top of the universal service programs that I was talking about at the FCC. So when you say, are there any other, are there any others addressing the digital divide? I do think that right now there's just this unprecedented amount of attention on this issue, and not just at the federal level, but I think a lot of states, a lot of localities are looking at this as well to figure out how they can make sure that they're bringing people online. It's interesting because we've heard from a lot of rural areas too that have seen a skyrocket in real estate prices across the state. People from counties where there is nothing but farmland. And it's because during the COVID pandemic, when people were able to work from home, there were a lot of people fleeing the cities and, leaving areas like Washington, D.C. to go to rural Virginia, rural Maryland. And a very important piece of being able to be in those rural parts of America is connectivity. Like, it does not happen. You cannot encourage young families to come move to like your locality and to start small businesses and grow their families, grow their careers, unless you have robust connectivity. So, like I said, more attention to this issue, I think, than ever before. It's an exciting time. But there's a lot of money flying out of Congress, flying out of agencies right now. So it's something we're definitely watching at the FCC.
And all the attention is rightfully so. So you talked about all these various agencies involved in solving this problem. What are some of the challenges in dealing with all these cooks in the kitchen? Are there any concerns with maybe having the problem too dispersed amongst the agencies?
Yeah, there are certainly challenges. One of the really big challenges that we've been seeing since early on in 2020 is just a lack of coordination. So a lot of these agencies, not just the federal agencies, but I think at the state level too, they're not communicating. There are inconsistencies between the rules as to the different programs, where the dollars can flow, what they can be spent on. There have not been enough safeguards put in place to prevent duplication of funding either. So I would say like the coordination piece is a really big part of it. So, we have no way at this point in time in ensuring that people receiving those DOE dollars aren't also receiving funding from elsewhere, possibly for the same, for the same connectivity or for the same devices and equipment. And I think part of that too is this lack of tracking. So a lot of the agencies, in the interest of getting the money out the door as quickly as possible, they just were not putting accountability measures in place. So a lot of the different programs that we are seeing do not have reporting mechanisms in place, or if there are reporting mechanisms in place, they're very inconsistent across the programs. So, you don't have your like typical auditing happening. Like at the FCC, we have, through our universal service programs, there are random audits that are done, and there's the potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. But because these programs have been in place for a long time, we do have safeguards in place, and we're constantly evaluating ways that we can, be more protective of that funding and make sure that there isn't waste, fraud, and abuse happening. So, whereas some of these programs that were set up very quickly, very rapidly to get the dollars out, once the check was written, like you have no idea what happened to that money. And we may not know for a long time. So that's another really, really big problem. And then I think another big bucket is just not prioritizing individuals that are actually on the other side of the digital divide. So in some cases, some of these programs are providing funding for the deployment of faster, future-proof networks or future-proof technology in geographic areas where there is already connectivity. So, putting fiber in the ground in places where there may be other services available today, rather than prioritizing areas that have no service. I mean, there are parts of the United States of America that do not have any broadband. It's kind of hard to imagine. For me, I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and in the DMV area. I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in a pretty rural area, but even my rural area now has at least one cable service running or providing services to my parents' house. But there are some places that have nothing. And so we think that not prioritizing those areas that have zero over areas that may have lesser speeds is a mistake. We need to make sure that it's a mistake to not prioritize those areas. Sorry, I think I twisted my words a little bit. But so I think that's another really big bucket of challenges. And then that brings me to the next point too of overbuilding. So same thing, overbuilding is another really big issue where there has been a preference for fiber and putting fiber in the ground. Government dollars are being used to build services where another provider may be already offering service using other types of technology, such as fixed wireless. And it's interesting today, actually, a handful of stakeholders on the Hill just sent a letter to NTIA encouraging them to not overbuild using fiber in areas where there is fixed wireless being provided. And so allowing spending in areas that lack that 120 megabit per second service, the government is actually going to be providing dollars where providers are maybe even already receiving funding through other programs. So like at the FCC, we still have some providers that are receiving funding to build out 25.3 and 10.1 service through our high cost funding programs. And so those areas are eligible for funding or will be eligible for funding through NTIA's BEAD program. So you'll have taxpayer dollars through NTIA overbuilding, FCC provider recipients that are building out services in compliance with the metrics that were set, a handful of years ago when they first received that funding. So that's another really big issue. But we're tracking all of it. We don't think it's too late to correct course, which I think is the silver lining here.
Definitely. And I just want to shift gears a little bit before we let the audience ask a few questions and talk quickly about the practice group. What are some career opportunities within telecommunications and electronic media, both public and private sector? Obviously, you're currently in the public sector.
Yeah, sure. So currently at the FCC, I think there are a lot of opportunities at the Federal Communications Commission, but I also think that if we're interested in tech, telecom, electronic media, there are plenty of opportunities before the Federal Trade Commission, in the Department of Commerce, at NTIA, depending on exactly what your practice looks like there are also a lot of IP attorneys before the USPTO and, Copyright Office that also do tech and telecom type work. There are a lot of private communications companies, a range of companies. So you have satellite companies, internet companies, edge providers, broadband providers, fixed and wireless companies, big and small. Those are all different opportunities available. So a wide array of different types of jobs, depending on what you're looking to do. I think that there's also a lot of state PUC or state, PSC, so Public Utility Commissioner, Public Service Commission work that can be done at the state level. And then I started my career, I was at a law firm for 5 years in private practice. So there's always the opportunity to do private practice as well, and to either be very policy hill focused in your work at a law firm, or regulatory in practice, or litigation in the tech and telecom space too. So I feel like there are a lot of different opportunities, there are a lot of different paths you could take.
Definitely, sounds like a lot of chances to be involved in a really exciting field right now. Uh, what Getting more specific to the Federalist Society, what types of events is the Telecommunications and Electronic Media practice groups hosting across the country?
Yeah, sure. So we do a lot of teleforums. We try to do at least one in-person event a year as well. These are focused on some of your bread and butter telecom type work that we're doing at the FCC, but we also look at antitrust. We look at, social media content regulation. We look at First Amendment, free speech issues. So we cover a really wide array of issues in our practice group, and we have a really diverse group of individuals in our practice group as well, which is kind of fun and exciting. We have former administrators, former commissioners. We have, a lot of advisors to them, people from the Hill that participate as well. So it's a really good group of individuals.
Awesome. Sounds like a great group to be a part of. What do you see as the future of your practice and the practice group as a whole in this kind of time where things are shifting rapidly?
Yeah, sure. So I think, technology continues to evolve and change. I do think that in the next few years, we're going to really see a lot of attention paid to this issue of social media regulation and what happens with social media, like that content that's being created, and the shift there in terms of like practice. Our practice group, we're trying to encourage more blog writing, more article writing, generate a lot of new ideas for things. We're always continuing to encourage new members to join our practice group as well. So if people are interested, they should certainly reach out to me or to one of our other practice group members to see if they could get involved or at least participate in some of our events.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for audience questions, so sorry to those with one burning. I am going to plug next week's study break is Criminal Investigations and Prosecutions from Federal to Private Practice, hosted by my friends over at Cornell Law School. Just want to give a huge thank you to Danielle for your time, and the Federalist Society and the Telecommunications and Electronic Media Practice Group. It's been an honor to host you, Danielle. It's been an amazing conversation. We wish all of you an excellent Thanksgiving. Thank you all, and have a great night.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. you.